What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video we're going to be covering the top 7 Stafford Gambit traps, all of which I learned from none other than Eric Rosen. And really the Stafford is a response for black against the move e4, in which we go into the Petrov's defense, and I mean usually against the move knight takes e5, we're going to play d6, kick that knight back, and then even out the material. But with the Stafford Gambit, we don't really care about evening out the material, but are simply going to continue developing our pieces with knight c6 and take that knight back with our d pawn. And yes, we're currently down a pawn, but this is one of the most enjoyable chess gambits the game has ever invented. We're currently attacking that pawn on e4, and development comes extremely quickly. We're giving up a pawn, but in return, there are a ton of traps that white can fall into from just playing good-looking moves. Let's first cover the option of d3. I mean, this seems like a very good move, just defending the pawn on e4, and against this, we're now going to play bishop c5. Now, in this position, white may be tempted to play bishop g5. I mean, just pinning our knight on f6 with potential e5 ideas, but it turns out that bishop g5 simply loses the game because we now have knight takes e4. The whole idea here is that following bishop takes d8, winning our queen, we now have a mate in 2 as we take that pawn on f2, swing our bishop into g4, and we have ourselves a game over. I do want to mention that in this position, white doesn't have to take our queen on d8, but really no matter what white plays, we're going to win this game. For example, if the move queen e2 is played, we simply take that bishop back with our queen, and now against queen takes e4, Eric Rosen loves this move, king d8, and I mean, if you just look at the activity of our pieces on c5, on g5, and our rook that is currently threatening to come to e8 and pin the queen to its own king, this position is simply resignable for white. So that covers our first trap with the move d3. Our next 2 traps come out of the move e5, in which case we're going to centralize our knight on e4. And now again, there's 2 traps, one with d3 and one with d4. Let's first cover the option of d4. And against this, we're going to play queen h4, threatening a mate and 1. And I think the best option here for white is probably something like bishop e3 or queen e2. But white may be tempted to play g3. I mean, just kicking our queen, making our queen go backwards with something like queen e7 or queen d8. I mean, if we play queen g4 here, white simply plays f3 and wins our knight on e4. But it actually turns out that we don't need to move our queen, but can simply take that pawn on g3 with our knight. Now the idea is that if this h-pawn takes, thank you for the rook. And if the f-pawn takes, thank you for the rook. We have queen e4 check. We're going to take that rook on h1, and we have ourselves a 1 game. So that covers the trap of d4, in which case we're going to play queen h4, and against g3, take that pawn, swing our queen to e4, and we have ourselves a 1 position. What about the move d3? Again, none of these moves look bad. I mean, these all seem like pretty logical moves. This looking to attack the knight on e4, kicking it to c5, but it actually turns out that d3 loses the game as we simply have bishop c5. And here the idea is that if white takes our knight on e4, we can capture on f2 with check, idea being if king takes f2, thank you for the queen on d1, in which case we're going to be attacking both the bishop and the pawn on c2, and if king e2 is played trying to hold on to the queen, well, now we simply have bishop g4 check, forcing that king over to f2. We still win the queen, but now with the bishop on g4, this is simply winning for black. Going back to this position in which we just covered white taking our knight and us taking that pawn on f2, white doesn't need to take the knight. I think the best option for white is probably bishop e3, but even against this, black is simply winning because we now have bishop takes e3 followed by queen h4 with check. I mean, if king e2, queen f2 is checkmate, game over, as well as bishop g4. And now if g3, we can simply take that pawn off the board, capture that rook on h1, and this is simply crushing for black. So again, guys, against e5, we're going to centralize our knight, and against d3 and d4, we have some fun traps. We really would love for white to play d3 because this is simply losing because of that bishop c5 option. What about the move knight c3? This is a very logical move, simply defending the pawn on e4, and again, we're going to play bishop c5. I mean, really against any move except for e5, kicking our knight to e4, we're going to put our bishop here, attack that pawn on f2, and we really do have some very fun traps here. There are 3 different traps. The first one we're going to cover is with d3, and then lastly, we're going to cover the traps with bishop e2 and bishop c4. What happens if white just plays the move d3? Well, this is simply losing for white. white. This seems like a good option, a quiet move. I mean, white just trying to really solidify their position. But now we have knight g4 with both the knight and the bishop attacking that f2 pawn, and really white needs to play bishop e3, or else we're just going to take that f2 pawn, win the rook or queen on h1, and we have ourselves a 1 game. Against bishop e3, we're actually going to take back with our knight, and against f takes e3, capture back with our bishop. And now if a move like queen e2, trying to get rid of our very strong bishop, we can now actually just play queen g5. And the material is even, but I would give black the clear advantage. When I plug this into the computer, it shows a minus 1.3 advantage for black. This queen on g5 protecting this bishop that is really preventing the king on e1 from castling at all. White has a very awkward position, especially this bishop on f1 that is locked in by the light squared pawn chain on e4 all the way down to c2. Black has a great position here, and I would take black here every single time. So again, guys, in this position, d3 is simply a huge mistake because we can play bishop g4, take that bishop on e3, and we have ourselves a very nice middle game position. What about the move bishop c4? Well, against this, again, we have knight g4, and I think that black is simply better. Here the best move is probably queen f3, defending the pawn on f2 a little bit, but really threatening a mate in 1 on f7. And against queen f3, I recommend knight e5, attacking both the queen and the bishop, and black does have a pretty good edge there. But most of the time, you may see a move like castling kingside. I mean, why would white be scared of us playing knight g4? I mean, if we give up 2 minor pieces for just a rook and a pawn, I think white would be pretty okay with that. But in this case, we're not going to take the pawn on f2, but play the stunning queen h4, threatening a mate in 1. And now, I mean, h3 is more or less forced, and against this, we simply take that pawn back on f2. If rook takes f2, thank you for the rook and a huge attacking edge. And if a move like queen f3, we can now play knight takes h3, double check, meaning that this king needs to move to a square like h2, in which case we bring the knight back to f2 and finish this game off with queen h1. So that covers the move bishop c4, which I guess in the case of bishop c4 or g3, we're going to continue with knight g4, a very key idea. What happens if white plays bishop e2? I mean, obviously by playing this, white is trying to prevent us from bringing our knight there. And if we do this right now, we're simply going to lose a piece. So against this, we're now going to play h5, looking again to bring our knight into g4. And white here may again really not want us to play this, so they may play the move h3. I mean, really trying to prevent our knight from jumping into that square. But against this, we can now play queen d4, threatening a mate in 1. And against the move castling kingside, play knight g4 anyways. An absolutely killer idea. Eric Rosen has used this to beat multiple grandmaster level players, and really the move knight g4 does 2 things. I mean, first off, we're simply threatening to take that pawn on f2. And on top of that, if white doesn't take our knight, we can simply play queen e5, followed by queen h2 checkmate. And if we play queen e5 first, and then white takes our knight, our rook is going to be active and taking over both h2 and h1. So really in this position, white needs to take that knight on g4, or they're in big trouble. But even then, we take back with our h-pawn, and now we're threatening to play the move queen e5. For example, if white plays a quiet move like d3, we're now going to play queen e5, threatening a mate in 1 on h2. And keep in mind that d4 cannot be played because of this bishop on c5, pinning the pawn to the king on g1. And now, if the move g3 is played, we simply take that pawn, we have a checkmate, and a game over. So a quiet move like d3 or b3 doesn't work because we can simply play queen e5, threatening a mate in 1. And in the case of g3, we're going to take that pawn. So here, white really does need to play g3. And against this, we're still going to play queen e5, threatening a mate in 1. And the reason why I did this first was so that they can get a little bit of time to play king g2. And obviously against this, we can't take the pawn because we would just lose our queen. But now we have the stunning move, really the only move for black, with bishop takes f2. This is simply winning for black because we are threatening a mate in 1 on g3. Now let's first cover the move king takes f2, and then we'll cover rook takes f2. Now if king takes f2 is played, I mean, at least at the moment, white is ahead 5 points in material, but now we play rook h2 a check, idea being against king e1 or king g1. we're just going to play queen takes g3, and the game is at least going to be over in 2 more moves with a mating attack. So here white is really forced to play king e3. I mean, just throwing their king out there, in which case we're going to play queen takes g3 with check. If king d4, I mean, white doesn't really want a king on d4 at this point in the game with so many attacking pieces. I think the best move here is bishop f3, but even against this, we're simply going to continue with a move like bishop e6, and if white wants to try to trade off with queen e1, that's okay. We're going to play queen h3. We're currently down a piece and a pawn in material, but in return, talk about an attacking advantage. We have a rook on h2, queen on h3, an active bishop. We're about to castle queenside and have a rook pouncing down on d4, d3, and d1. This is simply winning for black. If you plug this into any computer program, it's going to tell you that this game is simply over. So king takes f2 doesn't work because we simply play rook h2 check, queen takes g3, and we have a massive attack on the king that's either going to be on e3 or d4. What about the move rook takes f2? It seems as if, at least for a second, that white is simply winning this game. I mean, if we play a move like rook h3, white can simply play rook f4, prohibiting us from taking that pawn on g3, and white is simply winning. However, again, there's one move in which we can simply win the game, and that's queen h5. And I know some of you are probably wondering, wait, why didn't we just play queen h5 right away? Why did we take the pawn on f2? Well, really the reason we did this was to get this rook off of the first rank. If we played queen h5 right away, rook h1 could have been played, and the rook would have had 2 defenders, one with the king and one with the queen on d1. But in this position, because of the rook on f2, which is a very awkward spot, white can't play queen h1, or we're simply going to have a game over, and now we have the killer threat of playing either queen h3 with check or queen h2, followed by queen h1 checkmate, game over. And if a move like queen g1, trying to protect h1 and h2, well, queen h3 is simply checkmate. So in this position, I think it's best for white to play a desperation attempt with bishop takes g4, but in this case, we can simply take back with the bishop, forming a battery ram, attacking that queen on d1, and now following a move like rook f3, we can play queen h2 with check, break this game open with f5, and black is simply winning, no question. So guys, we really just covered the move knight c3, in which case we're going to play bishop c5, and against this we have traps against bishop e2, bishop c4, and d3. Keep in mind this bishop c5 followed by knight g4 ideas, and even if a move like bishop e2 and h3 is played, we can still play h5 and knight g4 with absolutely devastating attacking chances. What happens if white plays the move f3? Well, against this we have one final trap, and that's with the move knight h5, a tricky little move, bringing our knight to the edge of the board. And I think actually here in this position, the best move for white is easily either queen e2 or g3. And against this, we're simply going to continue with moves like g6, bishop g7, castle kingside, and maybe try to break this game open eventually with f5, really trying to go after the opponent's king. And that's a very fun variation. But what happens if white just plays a quiet move like knight c3? Well, now we have queen h4 check, a devastating idea, and here white is simply losing. I mean, if g3, we're simply going to take that pawn on g3, and if king e2, we're going to play knight g3 anyways. The whole idea here is that if this king moves, we're going to win this rook on h1. And if white takes the knight, we're going to take that rook. We're currently 1 point ahead in material with great attacking chances. Bishop e3 could be a move, bishop c5, not to mention this queen on h1. That is really making things hard for white. Black is simply winning this position, especially because of this king on e2 that can't castle and is really leading the charge with white's pieces. If you'd like to learn more on the theory behind the top 4 Budapest Gambit traps, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn more about the Nachmanson Gambit, click that video to the right. Leave a comment to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.